Hi students, welcome to Year 9 Science and Unit 2, Our Amazing Earth. This is video number 10 and we're going to start looking at some of these things that are specifically associated with plate boundaries. And the first of these we want to focus on are mid-ocean ridges. The important thing about mid-ocean ridges is they fit nicely with the idea of seafloor spreading, and therefore we can use Hess's theory to explain how mid-ocean ridges are formed. We've already had a little bit of a look at the difference between what might be regarded as a rift valley and a mid-ocean ridge. And as with many things in geology, often the difference is just time. Time is a very important factor in geology, and it allows us to get some idea of what's actually going on as we look at things happening over time. We can see that there has been a small pulling apart of the Arabian and African plates, and where the Red Sea is in filling that little rift valley between those two plates. And it's kind of like the potential birthplace of a new ocean, if you like. If you want to think about it in that way, it's just how far apart they end up that often is the difference between these. And of course, where the water is coming from, where it's being fed, and where it's leading to. So you may remember on a previous video we looked at Hess's idea of seafloor spreading. The idea that continents, particularly if you think about South America and Africa, that's the two classic ones because their jigsaw fit is so nice. They seem to fit beautifully together. But over time, they've moved apart from one another. That whole idea of two plates separating from one another with a mechanism that we now understand to be plate tectonics driven by potentially convection cells in the mantle. And as a result of that, we have seen the sea floor getting bigger and bigger and bigger, basically on the Atlantic Ocean between South America and Africa. Rifting is something that applies to the separation of two continental land masses, and that's why we can use this example of the Red Sea to sort of look at the early stages of what may have happened between South America and Africa many millions of years ago. The reason that this is such a great example is because we can use some of the tools that we've started to gather now in order to try and explain this. So we've got the South American plate and we've got the African plate, and they are moving apart from one another. And as a consequence of that, in between them, we see these mountains in the ocean. We see these incredible mountains forming in the ocean. What we've said is that that's a result of those two blocks sitting above a hot spot in the mantle. And as a result of sitting above that hot spot, material from the mantle is rising. It's pushing the two plates apart as those plates just basically drift on their convection cells away from one another. Material is coming up from the mantle and is depositing and creating new sea floor in between these two continents, and that is oceanic crust. That's forming as a consequence of this deposition of material coming from deep within the mantle. Now, the interesting thing about this is how much evidence there is that supports this whole idea of two plates moving apart. We call these diverging plates. We're going to be looking at types of plate boundaries in another video. But for now, diverging plates are plates where we call them constructive boundaries. And they're constructive boundaries because they are adding new crust. In these situations, the new crust that's being added is oceanic crust, and it's creating new seafloor, and that seafloor is spreading as it pushes apart the two original continents of South America and Africa. So this is a really critical idea in these very large mountain chains that seem to be present on the ocean floor, the result of tectonic activity, material being deposited from the mantle and moving these two apart. As we've looked at previously, there is a lot of evidence that suggests this is the case, and you can see here South America and Africa, and these ridges of rock sitting in between them. So all of this sea floor that has been created. But the thing that hopefully you notice whenever you look at any of these diagrams is the symmetry. The symmetry is the key to the whole idea of seafloor spreading, the formation of mid-ocean ridges, and the idea of continental drift. And that's because the youngest of these rocks are at the center, actually at the mid-ocean ridge. Where those ridges are, that's where the rock is youngest. As we move further and further away from the ridge in consistent symmetrical patterns, we notice that the rocks are getting older and older. It's not just that the rocks are getting older as we move further away from the ridge, it's that they're doing it identically on either side of the ridge. So that's suggesting new material pushing away, more material pushing that material away, more material pushing each of the previously formed materials away, and we're just finding older and older material as we explore these interactions. So this is a very important observation, and it provides evidence for our understanding of this idea of seafloor spreading, continental drift, and the practical application of the use of plate tectonics. We've also talked previously about the symmetry in magnetic alignment. So in shifts in the Earth's magnetic pole, which we've noticed over time, and they too demonstrate symmetry around these mid-ocean ridges, around these mountain ranges that exist on the ocean floor. So there's a lot of evidence that supports the idea of Hess's seafloor spreading model. The presence of mid-ocean ridges have been a very important piece of evidence that's helped us to describe what's happening when these plates move apart from one another, when they use those convection cells within the mantle to push apart from one another. But mid-ocean ridges form, as we've said, from divergent plate boundaries where new material is being added. They're a constructive kind of a process. But they're only one of three very important different types of plate boundaries, and we really need to look at each of those in a little bit more detail, which we will do in the next video. Thanks for watching.